Committee for the all payroll claims payment arrangement files, appendices 1 and 2. We will be getting started in just a few minutes. And just to let people know, for planning purposes, I'm expecting this to be perhaps 40 minutes of the hour and a half. We do want to do a standard of an hour and a half for rural advisory committees, because some require them that long. But this is a pretty straightforward change we are thinking, and people have not told us differently yet. So we'll go through everything that we're changing, but you'll probably get back a lot of time this morning. That's the plan right now. We do ask that people go ahead and put their name and organization into the chat, including whether or not you are a formal representative on the Rural Advisory Committee or not. And we've got that later on as well. So if you're not really sure what you want to do yet, you can hold off on that. But if you are aware of that process, then please feel free to do that now. Good morning or early afternoon to those of you that have just joined us. We'll get started with the Oregon All Claims Rural Advisory Committee meeting for the payment arrangement files, aka appendices 1 and 2. In just a couple of moments, we're waiting to see if anyone else joins us, and then we'll get started. My apologies for my squirming that you're seeing on camera. My Chihuahua came in from a walk and now she's having to settle herself. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. As I said, this is the Rural Advisory Committee for the Oregon All Payer All Claims, and today we will be talking about the payment arrangement files. Here we go. So just a quick overview of the Zoom features, microphone and video controls. People are welcome to ask questions during this meeting, so you should not require any special privileges to be able to unmute yourself and be able to speak. You can see a list of who all is present. The chat feature is in active use. And then if you want to do a transcript, it shows you where you can do that as well. Just as a reminder, we are recording the meeting and we will be posting the meeting online within a relatively few days. So if you want to review it for something that was said, or you want to have somebody else listen to it, we will have it available. So at this time, we want to encourage people to go ahead and put your name and organization in the chat. And we would like to know who's formally representing an organization in the Rural Advisory Committee. We have an example here of just saying who you are or who's the RAC. And this is an indication of who we should list on the Secretary of State documentation of the meeting as an official RAC member, and who is simply participating as they would our normal TAG meeting. Because this is required by law to have a Rural Advisory Committee, or in this case, meeting in lieu of a Rural Advisory Committee, we are a little bit more formal. Anyone can ask a clarifying question, but we ask that only RAC participants advise us on something that's being said. So might just be that the first one in an organization who realizes that there's something they want to advise us on becomes that person. But if you can go ahead and fill your information in, that would be greatly appreciated. We also said that there'd be a verbal on the agenda, that there'd be a verbal request for anyone attending by phone that is not also in the group chat. If you are calling in and you don't have access to the chat, please take yourself off mute and let us know your name and organization now. Okay, well, hopefully that was long enough, but people can certainly join in at any time. So here's our agenda for today, the welcome that we've done. We'll talk about the purpose of a Rural Advisory Committee and the RAC policy, a roll call, and again, just confirming that we have the right people on the list for formal attendance, a summary of proposed changes, a review of those changes, of the review of the notice of proposed rulemaking worksheet. We used to review the actual documents. Everything's gone online now, so there aren't actual documents, but we'll review the content that we're proposing and then what our next steps are going to be for this rulemaking. So purpose of Rural Advisory Committee, we actually have 2 slides on this. So during the RAC meeting is an opportunity for external experts, businesses, and other interested persons or groups to give input to OHA about proposed rulemaking. The RAC's role is advisory and consensus is not necessary. If you, however, agree with something someone else has said, certainly speak up. The more often we hear it, the more weight it's going to have, unless it's just something that's so clear. It's like, yes, of course, we should have thought of that. But both of those situations are absolutely appropriate for comments. Community involvement is required unless an exemption is received. And as a secondary data set, APAC has not yet established connections with communities and received an exemption for this year for that purpose. Then after the RAC meeting, we'll discuss and really pay attention to all the suggestions and concerns that were raised by RAC members in public. We'll finalize the proposed text and submit the notice of rulemaking or notice of hearing. I think it's a notice of rulemaking to the Secretary of State. And then the public, including all of you, will have the opportunity to review and comment on the proposed rules as is required by our statute. At the end of the slideshow, I have a link to the Secretary of State site. We also have information about when that public hearing is going to be and when the ability to submit written comments ends. So we'll have all of that in place. So are there any questions from anyone on the purpose of a rule advisory committee or what we're attempting to do here today? And you can take yourself off mute or you can type it into the chat, whatever works for you. I know many of you have been through this process several times before. Okay, so the formal roll call, and as I'm looking through the chat, it looks like no one has indicated that they're here specifically for representing their organization for the RAC. So if you are agreeable to being the representative on the RAC, I would encourage you to just go ahead and type that message in so that we don't end up submitting something that said, you know, we had a dozen people attend, but no one wanted to actually be on our rule advisory committee. Because that sounds sad. We don't want to start things off that way. This is, from my perspective, this is a very low-hanging fruit change that we're proposing. It really is clarification in our instructions. We're not changing any actual rule language. So, and again, I just want to say that everyone is welcome to attend the meeting and make comments. So we're not, that is the same as our normal tag meetings. And thank you for those of you that are clarifying that you're going to be the RAC members. I appreciate it. Okay, summary of proposed changes. We've got 2 pages on this. Page 1, Appendix 1. As I just said, there are no rule amendments proposed. We're proposing some changes to the file layout. So we are dropping the word null, which apparently is sub 1980, and using the plain language of blank. This is not anticipated to change anything people are doing. This is what we have been doing. We're just updating our language because it's caused a lot of confusion for people that don't think in mainframe, amazingly enough, since that's, you know, 50 years out of date now. We're doing 2 corrections of the field type from numeric to text. Numbers are used, but they're used as characters. There isn't any automatic ranking where 1 is better than 0 and 2 is better than 1, or vice versa. And we stated which fields those are. We're updating the description for the total primary care claims payment to reference the current rule. That definition was amended last year. And we're moving a lookup table into the file layout that was previously in the frequently asked questions. And adding 1 taxonomy integrative medicine physician. Are there, and we will be going over each of these in detail in just a moment. So Appendix 2, this is our control file. We are removing a note that PBMs are not required to submit the files because that's in our rule. So that's not changing it, just removing it from the file layout is not the best place to have that information. And then for multiple rows, we're indicating what should be totaled or summed. And for all of them, it's the line of business. And we'll be looking at that more closely. Now, because we're going to go over each of these changes in detail, I'm not going to necessarily pause here for questions. But here, we are absolutely open for any questions or comments people have. And I am not going to show you every single page where we've changed null to blank. I'm showing you the first page, and then the other pages that we'll be showing you actually have more substantive changes to them. So we're removing the description of when null is used here. Oops, sorry, jumped the page when I didn't intend to. And did it again. So this part, without touching the screen, and we're replacing null with blank. So this is an example of what we've done throughout the file layout. So are there any questions on this removal of the description of what is meant by null and the use of null here and throughout the document. Oh, yes. Thank you, Bill. We'll remove the typo at the end of blank here on this first line. It looks like it should be an exclamation point, blank. Yeah. I actually think it's a stray L, but thank you for noticing that. Okay, so next we have several other examples, but the reason we're showing this is APM 101, where we're changing the field type from numeric to text. And not changing the values of it at all, or the maximum length or anything else that is in it. But just recognizing we're not using this for its numeric value, we're using it as a character. So any questions here? Or comments, of course, it doesn't have to be a question. All right. Then on this screen, we want to highlight that we are changing the reference for the total primary care claims payments from the old rule to our current rule for the definition of primary care, and introducing that we have added the lookup table for the specific taxonomies, procedure codes, and diagnosis codes used, which will actually be in a couple of screens that will be showing you that in detail. Again, the change to the definition has already occurred. We added the definition to our files. And this was part of the combination of using the payment arrangement file for the prominent carriers report at the Department of Consumer and Business Services, as well as the CCO primary care spending report, that we brought the rules in since some of the other rules were being deleted for that purpose. So, and again, apologies, my chihuahua sitting behind me and decided she needed to scratch. So, and then on this screen, it's a second instance of us changing it from numeric to text. We'll continue to use the numbers, but we're using them as characters, not for their numeric value. So this is the example of the new lookup table, PRAPM 107, total primary care claims payments and how it's configured. The only change from what we had before is the inclusion of integrative medicine physician in the taxonomy of what's accepted to be primary care. Other than that, we simply lifted it out of our frequently asked questions and moved it into our file layout. And the reason we're doing that is because we should not rely on people going to our frequently asked questions to know what they need to do. We should be providing that in our official instructions that are incorporated by rule. And we will still have frequently asked questions. We actually have a new set of, or slightly updated frequently asked questions for the payment arrangement files that we will be soon sharing as a draft for review to see if it raises questions for people rather than answering them. And then the next, well, this is, yeah, so everything else as far as the ICD codes and the CPT codes is unchanged, just lifted out of one and moved to the other. So this is our last detailed change on Appendix 1, the contract level payment arrangement file. Are there any questions generally, or is there anything that people think we should have taken this opportunity to clarify that we've missed?
No, but this is very helpful to have these lifted and pulled into this instead of trying to find them someplace else.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. So then similarly, we just have the one page for the payment arrangement control file. This is something that we were already expecting people to do and know, and now we're just putting it in writing in front of people to make it a lot easier to know. When you say some, What are you trying to have us sum? So for each of them, it is simply the line of business indicated in 108. And then, as I noted earlier, we're removing the note that PBMs don't have to file this. It's in our rule. They still don't have to file it. It's just more appropriate to have it there than here. This is simply focused on what does the file look like. Now, we haven't made any changes to the Excel file because the items we're changing are informational directions. We're not adding any fields. We're not changing any activities. So we're not anticipating any changes to the Excel file. And of course, we will continue to accept it for both the Appendix 1 and 2. So any questions on the control file changes? Okay. I'm going to move forward to the notice, excuse me, notice of proposed rulemaking worksheet. As you guys are used to working with government offices, everything just rolls off the tongue so easily. So first of all, the timing. We're going to have our hearing on June 20th at 11 a.m. It will be a virtual hearing, and Pete Udland will be our hearing officer, as he has been for the last couple of years. So he's very familiar with APAC and what we're doing. The last date and time for public comment is anticipated to be June 21st at 5 p.m. Any questions about the dates and times? So the filing caption proposed, I know this page is essentially almost blank, but the filing caption is often what people look at to know whether they need to read the detail that's underneath it. So we do want to make sure that we run this by everyone, that it makes sense to you to use this as the filing caption. Generally, we try to keep it under, say, 10 words, but if people have suggestions about what the filing caption should be that would be more meaningful, I'm happy to receive those comments and suggestions. But what we're proposing is simply update all payer, all claims payment arrangement files. Okay, the next section is the statement of cost of compliance. We are not anticipating any changes. I acknowledge that any significant costs, I should say. I acknowledge that adding, if you choose to do so, the integrative medicine physician is going to be a change. We're hoping that the other items are not going to be a change for anyone, that it's simply being clearer about what's currently expected. But do people have any comments on the statement of cost of compliance? Okay, then the next slide is the equity impact statement. This is a required part of the form. Essentially, as a secondary data set, we have not yet connected to any community groups for the use or data collection of APAC. And we're continuing to work with the Equity Inclusion Division for the best way to do this. One of the things that we do not want to do is reach out to a lot of community groups and say, hey, we'd love you to attend this rulemaking or some other activity, and then have them show up and say, what can you do about A, B, or C? And we're like, well, nothing, but we'll tell you what happens after the fact. So we really want to be clear on what our niche is with the groups so that they know the value of what they're doing. But we do hope to have them advise us on use of the data. Something else that's not here, but is relevant to our interaction with equity and inclusion and the equity impact statement overall, is that once the race, ethnicity, language, disability, sexual orientation, and gender identity repository is stood up by Equity Inclusion Division, we will attempt to obtain data from them, and that may well mean that in the future we would not be collecting race, ethnicity, primary language, Within this file, we'd simply use a standard set of data that you all, or many of you at least, would be sending to Equity and Inclusion Division for the repository. So we're hoping to have stronger data that way and decrease reporting burden. Okay, so that brings us to our next steps. We plan to publish with the Secretary of State next month, with the public comment period ending June 21st, the public hearing June 20th. We're expecting the rules, the final filing date to be July 20th, and we'd have the rules in effect August 1st for use and submission on September 30th. And then here's the promised link to where the Secretary of State publishes proposed rules, if any of you don't have it and would like to. So I'll pause again. Any questions on our timeline, our next steps? And I will have to learn how to turn off alerts so that when other people are chatting on other subjects, it doesn't ring through here. Okay, well, that actually is the end of today, with no rule language changes, and mostly just hoping to clarify our instructions to follow current practices. We're hoping that this has been quick and easy review for people. If you have any questions or concerns about the information, you don't have to wait until there's a formal announcement to submit those. You can let us know at any time, but we cannot change language that we've proposed after it's filed with the Secretary of State, which I expect to finalize the language by the end of this week or very early next week, unless we get a formal comment, or it's simply a typo, like sticking an extra L after blank that I made that mistake. But we cannot change anything without a formal comment being received through rulemaking. So this is the time to change anything or add anything that's really low-hanging fruit that we've missed. And otherwise, I will let you all go back to your other activities. Are there any closing comments or questions people have? All right, well, thank you. And in June, we will be having a tag meeting. Then again in July, and starting in July, we'll move to meeting every other month. So thank you all for your time today. I greatly appreciate it. Bye.